Hey guys, we're back outside my shop and we're going to be doing the assembly today on the welded aluminum boat project. So I've got all my patterns and stuff cut out, so I want to show you some of the tools I'm going to use and how to follow the steps to assemble this thing and weld it together. So let's go over the tools that I've got, and again, this isn't an easy process, so if you're finding it challenging, that's okay. Do the best you can, and we'll see how things turn out. Let's go. Okay, so quick review of the pieces I've cut out. I've got transom 1, transom 2. I've got the sides of the boat. I've got my 2 chine pieces. I have my center template, and I also have my hull pieces. All of those can be found right here on my first model. Again, there's the center template, my rear transom, my forward transom, which is basically a bulkhead to help shape the boat. And then on the underside, I have my 2 hull panels, my chines, and my sides. Now you might be thinking, yeah, these hulls and sides and chines are a little bit different, and that's because we're going to be laying out and cutting some curves onto them today. So I'm going to show you that process. It's not super difficult, but it will mean that everyone's boat looks a little bit different, and this is how designers can actually custom tailor their boats to suit their own needs. So you'll be able to choose a little bit about how high you want the hull to go versus the sides, and what the top edge of the boat looks like in terms of shear, and shear is the rise of the side along the front of the boat. So I'm going to create mine with a little bit more shear than this model one. Mine's very flat, and I'm going to create a little bit more of a bow on this next boat that I'm going to be building. Tools I'm using for this today: a pair of scissors for some cutting, ruler for a little bit of measuring. I have a couple layout tools, pencil, Sharpie, and then my welding equipment. Bit of a joke, but hot glue gun, some hot glue, and if you don't have this, you can always use tape, so I'll be using a little bit of tape anyways to hold some pieces in place. Let's get started with our transom assembly first. Okay, step 1 is to take your center template, and we're going to align it with our center line on our rear transom, and we're going to just temporarily tape this into place. And this is to attach the transom. So I'll use some painter's tape to this, and then I'll use my hot glue gun to weld them together. Okay, here you can see I've used 4 small pieces of tape to attach the transom to my center template, and I'm going to use my hot glue gun to add some tack welds in between these things, and that'll rigid it up a bit. If you don't have a glue gun, you could add more tape to this, and the next thing that we'll be doing is installing our forward transom to help shape the boat. We're going to be taking a measurement for that off of my model right here, and we'll check that out right now. Using a steel ruler, we're going to place this next one approximately 9 inches forward of the rear transom. Again, if you change this a little bit, it won't change the entire boat, but you don't want to have this transom too far back, and you don't want to have it too far forward, or it's going to maybe mess up the shape a little bit. Okay, we've got the rear transom on. I used my glue gun to add a little bit of hot glue in between the tape. This is kind of like spot welding. If you've never done welding before, I can assure you it's nothing the same as using a hot glue gun, but for our purpose here, it holds the pieces together. I've moved on to getting prepared to put my front transom in, and so what I did was I measured along the back of the center template, and I measured out 9 inches, which was the length I needed, and then I drew a vertical line. You can see here I've cut out a small notch, and I've done the same notch but opposite on my transom, and this is so that I can slide the 2 pieces together to actually fit them. So we're going to notch those together right now. So this is close to fitting together. It's not quite down far enough. I need to make sure that the bottom of the template will reach the bottom of the keel. So I'm going to remove just a little bit more cardboard on my transom so it'll slide up higher. And then I'm going to tape and tack weld these ones into place. Okay, we're taped into place, and we're going to add a little bit of hot glue into the corner here. A little bit to hold it. We're going to do some on the back, and we're going to keep this as straight as possible during this process. Just going to hold this straight while that glue sets up. Things still might be a little bit curved right now. We're going to be adding the hull next, and that'll help straighten things out. I'm going to add a little more hot glue here without my hands on the camera, and then we'll move on to laying out the hull. Okay, I've finished adding some hot glue or tack welding my front transom in. Again, if you don't have glue, use some tape You may have to use quite a bit to keep this in. You can use lots of small tabs like this all in a row, and that would represent your weld. Okay, moving on. I've selected one of my hull pieces, and we're going to use this to lay out the curve of our hull. And to do this, you're going to have to put a little pencil mark about halfway up the curve of your center template. This is going to be the location where the hull ends. And you can see that on my model here in blue, where we are upside down, and the hull is going to, in blue, is going to end at approximately that halfway point on the curve. So to do this, what we're going to do is put one hull piece on temporarily onto the bottom. So you're going to want to work upside down, and I'm going to be attaching this piece as straight as I can with some tape to the rear transom along the center template, and then we're going to pause there while we do some bending and curving. It's important this piece is a little bit longer than the boat, so if it is, that is a good thing. Okay, I've taped on my one hull panel. Again, this is just temporary, so I put one at the back. I made sure to make the transom as square as possible to the actual hull panel. I've added a few pieces of tape along the center line, and I've made sure that my hull isn't too wide, because the hull needs to be 2.5, just like the transom was, so there's a little 3/8 flat spot on each of the transoms, and that's for where we're going to be adding our chine. Now the reason this is on here temporarily is because we're going to be forming the front of the boat by curving our cardboard up the edge of the hull. And so you're going to be approaching this by bending your piece up to that center mark, and we're going to be making some markings to create the shape of the hull. This is a little bit tricky to film, but I'll get set up so I can show you how I'm marking it. Okay, so what we're going to do is gently bend up the front of the hull. We're going to put it on a little bit of an angle, but keep the center template flat and straight. So with it bent up, it'll be curving around the hull. We're going to put just a little tiny pencil mark right here and try and trace the shape of the hull from our pencil mark. I'm going to use a Sharpie for this. It'll be a little bit easier. So I'm just gently flexing this thing up. We're going to trace from that mark back down the curve until we get to the straight part of the boat. What you're going to end up with is a little bit of a curved line that'll wrap right up to the edge of the mark. From here, what we're going to do is draw a nice smooth or fair line back out to the corner of the boat. And this line here is just an approximation. When you go and hold everything up, you'll start to see the actual shape of the boat, and we're going to use this one as a pattern to cut out the next one. So it's going to look like a little bit of a torpedo, but that's how it should look. Very minor or very mellow adjustment, and I'm going to take this one off now. Okay, I removed the hull from the template, and now you can clearly see the shape that I've created. This one here was the trickiest. This is where I traced the center template while I was curving it up along the front of the boat. And then this is my fair line. Again, a fair line is just a nice smooth line, and this will be your own shape. This will create the shape of the hull as it is seen on the blue here on the front of the boat. And so we're going to cut out these shapes from this so we can actually put our hull together. Because we have two halves, we're going to now be bringing in our other piece of the hull to overlay so that I can cut them at the same time. This way they will match. You do have to be careful if you're like me and you have cardboard that's two different colors and you want to have a certain side facing out. Remember, you need to have a left and a right hand side, so you may have to get creative in how you layer these things. I'm going to put them over top, and I'm going to take my scissors here and I'm going to cut these things out, and then we'll be ready to more permanently install them back on the boat before we move on to working on the chine. I put my two pieces back to back to make a left and a right. I've lined them up carefully, and now we're going to cut our hull panel. Let's go this way first. Where this corner meets needs to be a nice tangent. It needs to round out really well to create a nice hull pattern. If this is too sharp of an edge or too pointed, it won't look as nice. Alright, let's remove this part. It's a little trickier to cut. Alright, here's my hull shape. As I said, it looks kind of like a torpedo. We're going to fold these ones out, and we're going to have a left and a right to put onto our boat. So we're going to go back and tape these ones on before tack welding them on, and you'll see the hull pull together. Okay, hull panel 1 with its curve cut is now tacked back into place. I just reused the same tape I did before. Again, emphasizing squareness on the transoms where they meet the hull is important. A couple pieces on the center line, and I've made this fit nice and flush. I've actually put another piece on the front here as well. Before I worry about folding the curve to create the bow on the hull, I'm going to add my second piece on here as well with some tape, and then we'll check in with a little bit of hot glue, and then we'll pull the front together. Alright, again, working upside down, got the second hull panel taped into place, and now we're going to work at fixing the bow. And what we're going to be doing is bending each piece and attaching it to the center template. I'm going to be using some hot glue to do this and a little bit of tape. I'm going to start with one side and then I'll do the other. You may have to do tape on the whole thing, inside and out, to create the shape of the bow. And these should join right up at the center. Be careful at this point that you try and keep your center template as straight as possible, and then the boat will be nice and straight. And so I'll set mine up here to show you how I attach it. Just holding things in position while that glue dries. Add a bit more. Alright, first side is intact. Let's do side 2. Try and make everything line up as neat as possible here. Of course, with real aluminum boats, they're using chains and block and tackle to pull all this stuff together while they tack weld it. Alright, things are moving together pretty well here. We've got the front bow together. It's all pulled together. The curves you can see are nice and smooth, fair, and we're creating our hull. I'm going to put a little bit of weld down the middle here as well, and then we'll remove some of this extra tape and move on to the chine. So I've taken the time to do a little reinforcement. I attached the hull with my hot glue weld along the bottom of the transom. I've done some spot welding along the inside of the hull where it meets the center line. And again, at the forward bulkhead or forward transom, I've put some hot glue in those positions on both sides, making sure the hull's nice and tight to those. Now I'm ready to add the chine, and the chine is going to have a little bit of work to be done to it as well. Again, we're going to fit these things on here, and they're going to be much longer than needed, so we're going to end up making a cut to have them fade or blend into the shape of the hull that we created. You can see that here on my other model where we have attached the chine in the flat spot, and we're just going to cut a small taper onto it to flow into the shape of the hull before moving on to the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and get mine positioned in place, and I'll show you what they look like before we cut them out. Okay guys, here's what mine looks like with the chines on, and I still have to do some trimming, so we're going to lay that out in just a second. All I did was I took hot glue and I did some spot welds all along the inside edge. I basically laid everything down flat, lined it up with my transoms, and then put small dabs of glue. Again, this could be tape if you needed to do so, and I've done that on both sides. Should be known, if this was a real boat build, at this time the center template would normally be removed on this type of boat, and we'd be removing a lot of material from this bulkhead and adding more of these for structural stability. Because we're making a model in this case, we're going to skip that step, but check out the YouTube video I posted on this process, because they do get rid of some of those other patterns. Things are looking pretty good here. My hull came together fairly well. It's time to now lay out the rest of this curve, in which case I'm going to extend this line a little bit before trimming it. So I'll draw those ones on and show you before I cut them. Okay, I penciled on my chine marks. I basically took my pencil and tried to recreate the same arc or radius as that I had on the hull. So I basically trace, and then traced a little bit more, and just free-handed that so it fades in nicely. Tried to match it on the other side by doing the same thing. Again, tracing this. You might have a small gap where it ends. That's fine. Fill it with glue or put some tape in there. And now we're going to cut these ones off. Here's the chines once cut and removed. Nice flowing curve right into the hull, and as we start to turn this boat over, you can see things are really starting to take shape here. So we have the hull completed, now we have the flat chine to help deflect spray, give some stability on this boat. The transoms are nice and square, some things are tack welded up. Sponsored by Rice Krispies, and it's time to move on to making the sides. So as we did before with the hull, we're going to end up using one of our side pieces to create a pattern for the shape, and they're going to kind of go on temporarily like this. So I'm going to get mine fastened on before we do some more bending, tracing, and then cutting of the side, similar to how we did the hull, and then we'll be attaching those, and we'll have a completed model welded aluminum boat. Okay, you guys, I've added the first side, and it should line up really nicely actually all down the edge where we have cut away the notch. Where the notch ends should be approximately where your other bulkhead is, and as you can see, I've used a lot of tape. Again, we'll be taking this piece off in a few minutes. Our next step though is to create the shape of the bow. And we're going to do a similar process as we did before by taking your cardboard piece and you're going to fold it around to meet the front. From here, we're going to do a little bit of tracing again. I'm going to use the inside of the hull where these two meet as a pattern, and I'm going to trace that. And then I'm going to create my shear line along the top. And this is just a bit of a freehand line to even out the bow. And you can create whatever shape you want to make the bow either nice and flat along the top like this one, or rised up. And so I'll show how mine lays out here in just a minute. I'm basically going to fold this one around, and I'm going to pin it in position with some tape before I start my tracing, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, I've traced up the center line of my template, you can see here, and I've made a tracing of the bow down below. Again, this is curved around to meet the shape. I've been working on my shear line on the top. I'm not super happy with it. I've crossed one off, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece, and I'm going to cut the inside to match on my second side panel before I come back and work on the shear again afterwards. It's looking so-so right now. I need to definitely even out the shear on the top, and you'll be able to visualize this a little bit on your own as you pull your boat together as well. Here we are with the side folded down off the side of the boat, and now you can see my trace line that I traced all along the inside edge of the hull right into where it met the chine, and it comes all the way back to the bulkhead. And so that's this curve right here. I'm going to go ahead and cut this part out now and up the bow. I'm going to do that at the same time as cutting this side, so I'm going to overlap them so that they match, and then we'll work on our shear line after we temporarily fit them back on. All right, I'll put the side back into place. and with the cutout of the hull, and I changed the shear line a little bit. You can see I've added a third one up top, and it's starting to look a little bit better. So I'm just checking the profile now, and you can see I've got a really raised up bow on this, so I might trim it down a little bit more. I think though I'm going to add tack weld this one into place, and then add my second side before I trim the bow to match on both sides, and this thing will be a little closer to being done. Time to lay down a whole bunch of glue on the inside edge of this one. You may have to use tape, obviously, so do the best you can. This is a challenging project. The first side is fully on. It's turned out pretty well. Had to use a little extra glue in some spots where I had some gaps, so don't get too frustrated if that happens to you. I've changed the shape of the bow again a little bit. It's looking fairly even with a little bit of a rise. I still might trim that down once I put the other side on. So I'm going to go ahead and add the other side onto to that right now, and it's going to be backwards. I have everything matching the hull on the inside except for this piece. I cut it out backwards. That's the way it goes. I make mistakes too. So we'll get this one on, and we'll finish up the bow. Guys, the final side is on. Got the final side on, and now I'm changing our shear line at the front. You can see the bow right now rises up really steeply, so I've drawn a construction line on there where I'm going to trim it away, and I'll make that match on the other side. Okay, the basics is just about finished on mine. I did have a small issue on the other side when we were putting it on, potentially because of the flex of the cardboard, potentially because I'm filming with one hand while doing this, but it didn't fit together as nicely, which is a little bit unfortunate. We did get the main side that I started with looking nice, and a smoother, flatter shear line, which I like a lot better for this boat. And I do have a little bit of a twist in mine, again possibly because this material isn't the best, but I gotta use what I got. So there's the basics of going through the construction of a aluminum boat build using a centerline pattern, double transom technique, adding dead rise angle, flat chines, a transom angle as well, and you can trim yours up and make it look the best you can. Again, not an easy project. Okay guys, so I want you to do the best you can on this one. I give you marks basically for giving it a good old college try. Again, use what you have and try and get through the basics of putting together a welded aluminum boat. I'm going to come up with a few questions to wrap up this assignment. Basically what dead rise angle means, bow curve, chine, and a few other things that I'll throw on there as well. And you can look back to the video and do some research to find out what the answers are to some of those questions. Alright, we'll be moving forward into some outboard motor maintenance and service coming right up for some more hands-on stuff, which is obviously challenging in this class. So hopefully we'll see you guys back in the shop soon. Alright, thanks.